Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. We could feel it, right? In the moment yesterday that history was being made in the state of Tennessee. Yes, of course, it was shameful that it came to all of that, expelling 2 state lawmakers ostensibly on procedural grounds over peaceful protests. But ask yourself this: if the ultimate goal of any demonstration is to draw attention, to shine a light on injustice, then who is really better off as we come on the air less than 24 hours later today? The Tennessee Republican Party or those 3 Democrats of whom they sought to make an example? Representatives Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, they lit the match that started a bonfire, one that burned from coast to coast as Americans watched transfixed yesterday afternoon into the evening on the East. Now millions across our country are infinitely more aware, not just of the barriers to doing anything more than nothing about the epidemic of gun violence, but of rank anti-democratic fervor among Republicans.
We are still here, and we will never quit.
We called for you all to ban assault weapons, and you respond with an assault on democracy.
Keep watching to the nation. Keep watching. We are losing our democracy. We need to make sure that we stomp out this march to fascism.
Those themes, gun safety and Republicans' abuse of power, are not the only part of this story, consistent with what we've observed on a national level, because the issue of racism, to be specific, is very much present here as well. When we last met, it was only Justin Jones who'd been expelled between 4 and 6 p.m. Eastern yesterday, and his colleague Justin Pearson later met the same fate. But surprisingly, or perhaps not at all, Representative Gloria Johnson, who is white, was not removed from her office by the Republican supermajority in Tennessee. Almost immediately, she publicly recognized that disparity and elaborated on this on MSNBC this morning.
To see how they were questioned in a different way from me. I had some of Republican colleagues say things like, well, they didn't show contrition, or the younger generation has a different way of speaking. They have a different way of addressing things. I am a 60-year-old school teacher. I might talk a little more level tone and that sort of thing. But it was very clear what this was about.
To all of us. This afternoon, a testament to just how far and just how wide this story has spread. The Vice President of these United States, Kamala Harris, is making a late change to her itinerary, her planned schedule today. Air Force Two expected to touch down in Tennessee later this hour. We understand she'll meet with the 3 Democrats. We will have a chance to talk to former Representative now, Justin Jones, about all this in a minute. We begin here at the table. Joining us right now, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. Basil Smikle's also here, Democratic strategist and director of the public policy program at Hunter College. Also joining us for the hour, former Republican congressman and MSNBC contributor David Jolly is here. Rev, if you wanted to tell the whole country a story about race, and if you wanted to tell the whole country about the Republican commitment to doing nothing about guns. In Tennessee, 71% of Tennesseans before the mass shooting at the school wanted legislation passed on background checks. Over 60% wanted legislation on red flag laws. Only 30% of Tennesseans wanted an armed presence at all the schools. If you wanted to tell the story of country about Republicans' embrace of authoritarian tactics and the toolkit, you would script something like what happened yesterday. But the Republicans are so ham-fisted, they just did it.
The first chairman of the board we had at National Action Network was Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, who was Martin Luther King's chief of staff. And he told me something I thought about yesterday. He said, Al, when we decided to take on public accommodations, Dr. King and I, we combed the South to figure out where to go. We went to Birmingham because we knew Bull Connor would sick the dogs and dramatize what we couldn't get publicity on. I don't think these three picked the legislature because I don't think they thought they'd be that crazy. But it was set up. People like us that are in civil rights or in activism need to have opponents like that to make your issue. They didn't have to do anything. They did it, and they rose to the occasion, these two young men and this young lady, Representative Johnson. All of them will be on my show this weekend. I was so proud at how they handled it because they didn't do it in a self-serving way. They did it by raising the issue above their own personalities, and they did it talking about how they were peaceful. There's not been one brick thrown, not one window broke, even with the anger, and I think you've got to give them a lot of credit. The only violence we've seen in Nashville was the shooting that they are protesting the guns on.
It's incredible. It's about, on the Republican side, more than suppressing the message about guns, right? It's about eliminating these representatives can't exist because why? I mean, what is the bigger thing at stake here? What is the terror that the predominantly white, predominantly male, I didn't see anyone that wasn't white or male, but I didn't check. Why can't that coexist with representatives who are female or young or black? Why did they have to be expelled? Why did this come to this, do you think?
They had to send a message that you stay in your place and that we've made a decision and that's the way it is. This is our culture. How dare you come in? First of all, you're lucky to even be in the legislature. You're lucky we let you in the room. And you're going to protest. You're going to raise questions about us. So we're going to use you, which was the old thing in the South. They whipped one guy in front of the rest, so you know this is what you're going to get. But they didn't understand we're not in the 1800s anymore, and we're not in even 1940. And that's for women and particularly these blacks. And I give a lot of credit to Representative Johnson. She didn't make excuses for them. I was on with her this morning, Morning Joe's. I told you she'd be on with me this weekend. She said there's only one reason they treated me different. And she only was restored by one vote. By one vote. She almost went with them. And I think that the multiracial, the interracial, intergenerational fight that they have put in front of those cameras really has energized the anti-gun movement in a marvelous way.
Which isn't just the Democratic Party. In Tennessee, 71% of Tennesseans, and we know they're not all Democrats, or the legislature wouldn't look like what it looks like, are for gun safety legislation. More than 60% are for background, 71% are for background checks. More than 60% are for the red flag law legislation. The idea that these men represent more Tennesseans than any of those Republican members seems inconceivable to any of those Republicans.
To me, right now, they represent more Americans than anyone in that chamber ever did. And to pick up on something you said, Rev, what the message that legislature is saying is don't be uppity. They're saying you have nothing except for what we've given you. And it's not just the speaker of that chamber saying that, they are saying that for all of white supremacy to those young men and that young woman. And to me, I actually, in watching all of this unfold, I thought a lot about my grandmother. Why? Because she used to read the Bible to me. And as Rev is sitting here, I thought about my book of Daniel. Those young men, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, who were thrown into the fire and survived that because of their faith and wound up converting everyone around them. That is the position that Justin Pearson, Justin Jones, and Gloria Johnson are in at this moment. It's an important moment because as you talk about where the country is, whether it's gun control, whether it's reproductive rights, the movement of my generation was largely anti-apartheid. This could be the movement of the next generation.
Totally.
It is democratization. It is expanding democracy, bringing more people in and not practicing the politics of exclusion and punishment, which is what we saw unfold in Tennessee. And I hope that this sends a message not just to the people of Tennessee, but to the rest of the country, particularly young people who were so helpful to Democrats in the midterms, that this is a moment that you can seize on in the in the tradition of an Elijah Cummings, in the tradition of a John Lewis who protested on the floor of the House in 2016, if you remember that, by sitting down. Yeah. It's in that tradition that these young people could rally around these young men in particular, these two young men in particular, to push the entire establishment back.
David Jolly, my special debt to the political conversation is my participation in Republican politics that laid the foundation for this. And if I have one desire, it's to pull the alarm and ring it as loud as I can about what that party has become. And I'm so disgusted by what the party is. Their silence as Donald Trump tramples across democratic norms, their acceptance and greenlighting and complicity in his annihilation of the rule of law that manifests in local prosecutors having to be the only people in the country with the you-know-whats to hold him accountable for crimes he commits in broad daylight and tweets about afterward. So for me to have an opportunity yesterday to come on the air at 4 o'clock and broadcast for 2 hours straight what the Republican Party is today, from top to bottom, from east to west, from north to south, was a privilege. But the terror I feel in not seeing a single Republican from east to west, north to south, condemn what the Tennessee Republicans did exceeds anything I felt over the last 7 years. What do you make of it?
Yeah, very similar reaction, Nicolle. I mean, a remarkable moment for Tennessee Republicans, but also national Republicans for their complicity in this. I mean, consider what they just said to the country. They said, you thought we were really bad on gun policy. Let us show you how much worse we are on issues of race. And that was the message they projected into the country yesterday. And I think that's why what we saw yesterday has pierced the conscience of Americans today, is because it highlights two areas where America has spectacularly failed. And it has largely spectacularly failed because of Republicans' inaction or deliberate actions on these two issues. We have children dying at the hands of gun violence in America's schools, and Republicans refuse to do anything about it. We have a country today that remains fully tethered at best to implicit racism and implicit bias, but often to the very raw, exposed racism that we saw yesterday. And the opportunity here and the forward-looking energy, if you will, is that Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, each of them have only served a matter of months. One just over 60 days in the House, one just over 90 days in the House. Their legacy today is far richer and greater than the 12 years of the Tennessee Speaker of the House ever will be. This is a galvanizing moment, not just on the issues of guns, but also on the issue of race and on the fundamental issue of a democracy for all people.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We've had this conversation around this table, all four of us, about voting on democracy. Do people get it? But this takes, Brad Raffensperger and Gabe Sterling's defenses of the voter suppression laws in Georgia. The public statements after the latest mass shooting that what are you going to do? We're going to do nothing. I'm not putting that on them. That's what they said in front of microphones. And then these Republicans saying that a peaceful protest cannot happen. It cannot exist before we buried 3 murdered 9-year-olds in the latest mass school shooting. I think this knits together the democracy voter with the gun safety voter, with the this is what America looks like today. It's not male and white and old voter. And I think the opportunity for Democrats is seismic.
I absolutely agree. And it's, as you said, it's stitching all of these points together to say that there is a minority of power in this country that is intent upon exercising that over the masses. Even if you think about the folks that were sent out on January 6th, they're not the architects. They're insurrectionists. They got arrested, they got convicted and went to jail. But the people who were still the architects of that, the people who still pushed all those buttons are still walking around. That there is a small
walking around. They're running the politicization committee.
That's exactly right. And weaponizing all of that, weaponizing every tool that they have in their war chest in government. And when you think about that, there has never been there probably was several points in time we could do this in our history, but in the modern history, in my time in politics, this is a moment where I have to say that young people can drive this bus for the rest of us. They will save us, I think.
But if we look, talking about threading, if we just look at this last week, it shows you where it's going. Sometimes you read the times you're in. Since last Friday, we've seen the former president arrested and indicted. We saw a black progressive win for mayor of Chicago when he was not supposed to win. Right. And we end in Tennessee with blatant racism.
And in the middle of Wisconsin, a progressive.
And I was getting ready, and we see Wisconsin that wasn't supposed to win. So people are becoming alert and voting and starting to threat. This is all in 1 week. Wisconsin, Chicago, and the expulsion in Tennessee, and the arrest of Donald Trump, with the masses that he said was going to protest didn't show up. Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos showed up almost alone. So I
they got out of their SUVs for like 19 seconds.
They forgot to get there. But I think that is why there's hope for putting this together. There's nothing more powerful, it is said, than an idea whose time has come. I think people are saying, wait a minute, we're not giving you this country like that. You must remember, we're not even talking about an HBCU, a black school. This was a white religious school, covenant school in Nashville. And they're acting like it's all right to shoot young white 9-year-olds. I mean, how much do they think they can get away with in their racism that others are saying, wait a minute, you're talking about my kids now, and you're going to expel somebody for protesting about my kids? I think that when you get drunk with power and bias, you lose all sense. What is it? Who the gods destroy, they first make mad. I think that they've gotten politically mad and don't realize they're talking to the average Tennessean when they see 9-year-old kids in body bags, and you're fighting for people to have the right to have 7 weapons legally that they should not have had.
Yeah, there is a piece of this, David Jolly, that Republicans now require men and women, old and young, of every race, every creed, to abandon what they can see and hear and smell. And Donald Trump said it. And this isn't today about Donald Trump, but it is about the Trumpism that has taken over. It didn't infect the Republican Party. It took it over. There's no more GOP. It is Donald Trump and the Trumpian movement, which now has replaced the Republican Party in this country. And if you don't want to vote for the Democrat, and there isn't an independent, it is now, if you vote for the Republicans, what you're voting for is voter suppression out in the open. They don't say it isn't. They may call them election integrity laws, but they're voter suppression laws. On guns, they have said out loud at the microphones, what are you going to do? We're going to do nothing. We can do nothing. 85% of the country didn't want to do nothing about mass shootings becoming the new norm. When that phone alert goes off, my first trepidation, my first fear, it used to be anticipation that maybe someone had charged Trump with the crime. It has been replaced by trepidation that there's been another mass shooting in America. And the third piece is newer, but I think people get it. It is, if we don't win the election, we'll impeach them. That is already what the chatter is on the right about the new state Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin. It is a full embrace of autocratic practices and behaviors and policies that has now completely taken over and replaced the old Republican Party.
Yeah, look, this is the foundational theme of what ultimately culminated in January 6th and then continued in the change and altering of state election laws throughout the country to give Republicans the tools to deny democracy, to deny suffrage, to deny the franchise. And largely they are denying not just Democratic partisan votes, but they are denying the votes of marginalized communities, black and brown communities around the country. And I would suggest that kind of the umbrella to all that, Nicolle, is the audacity for them to actually then tell you what you're seeing, you're not really seeing. Right. So we want you to engage in all these anti-democratic themes. And if that's what we have to do to stop you, that's what we will do. But when you call us on it, we're actually going to tell you that's not what you're seeing. You can't believe your own eyes. And I think it goes back to something Rev said at the beginning, which is the lesson from yesterday, I think, is fundamentally a question of race, where white legislators in old Tennessee told black legislators, stay in your place, stay in your place. There's no other thematic here except for that. And I think that is the critical thing that America woke up to today, that in this year, that a white legislative body will tell to young black legislators, your voice doesn't matter. And I want to defeat the equivalence that a lot of Republicans are giving, where they want America to think, oh, this is the same as January 6th, right? We had obstruction of a proceeding in January 6th. It is qualitatively different, not just because Tennessee was peaceful, January 6th was violent, but also because of this. The three members in question here were exercising their representation of their constituencies within the chamber. Now, Republican members did that on January 6th, and you could shout them down saying they were lies and they were full of conspiracies. But look what law enforcement does. They give elected members wide berth to give voice to their constituents. The people who were arrested and charged with January 6th were the true people that obstructed the proceeding, those from outside of the process. These three Tennessee members were within the process, exercising a voice on behalf of their constituents. They were not kicked out because of that voice. They were kicked out because they were black. And I think America today has to acknowledge that.
President, I want you to respond to that, but I also want to share what President Obama had to say about this. This nation was built on peaceful protests. No elected official should lose their job simply for raising their voice, especially when they're doing it on behalf of our children. What happened in Tennessee is the latest example of a broader erosion of civility and democratic norms. Silencing those who disagree with us is a sign of weakness, not strength, and it won't lead to progress.
No doubt about it. When you look at how the former representative, now Pearson, outlined the egregious behavior of some that are in that legislature now. Mm-hmm. I mean, sexual harassment, all kind of stuff, urinating on one of their fellow lawmakers' chair, and that didn't get them expelled. You know the only reason they did this is you boys stay in your place. How dare you raise a question of safety or anything else? You're lucky you're in here. And because if it was about conduct, how did they excuse all the conduct that he categorically listed for them and therefore the nation to see? This is about race. But unfortunately for them, a lot of whites, a lot of their children, a lot of young whites are standing out in front of that Capitol building saying, we're not going back there. And we're going to fight about gun safety, but we're going to do it together. And again, Representative Johnson, even though they saved her position, she walked out arm in arm with those two black guys. That's what gives us the hope to keep going.
All right, so no one's going anywhere. Let me tell you a little bit of what we're juggling. When we come back, we anticipate we'll have an opportunity to speak with expelled state representative Justin Jones on what the late John Lewis described as good trouble, from sit-ins to marches to boycotts, how what we are watching happen in Tennessee contributes to a long-standing all-American legacy of the most powerful and impactful peaceful protests. Plus, gun rights activist Congressman Jared Moskowitz will be here along with Fred Guttenberg, our dear friend of this program, talking about this moment and how emotional it's been for him to watch the week's events. Later in the show, we'll get to the January 6th investigations. Questions continue to swirl about one of the biggest mysteries around the insurrection. What happened to those missing Secret Service text messages? That new reporting and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere today.
Hey everybody, it's Savannah Guthrie.
And I'm Hoda Kotb, and we've got some great news to share.
The Today Show is now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Can you believe that? Right now, you can get your daily dose of news and headlines and the day's top interviews from us right here every single morning.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day, wherever you get your podcasts.
So why not subscribe and follow today to start listening?
Sometimes you have to do something out of the ordinary. Sometimes you have to make a way out of no way. We have been too quiet for too long. There comes a time when you have to say something, when you have to make a little noise. When you have to move your feet. This is the time. Now is the time to get in the way. The time to act is now. We will be silent. No more. The time for silence is over.
seen that so many times, and it's amazing every single time. That was 7 years ago. Basil mentioned that moment when Congressman John Lewis, the civil rights icon, who was just 23 years old when he spoke at the March on Washington, led a sit-in on the House floor over Republicans' refusal to hold a vote on, wait for it, gun safety legislation following the mass shooting, the massacre at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Joining our conversation, one of the two expelled Tennessee Democratic lawmakers, Justin Jones. It's a privilege to get to talk to you. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much.
We were covering the vote for your expulsion live, and we'd spoken to you the day before. We had some sense of what might be coming down. But your comments were prescient. You talked about the world watching. The world certainly was and is. And so we wanted to ask you what comes next.
I think what comes next is really up to the speaker, Cameron Sexton, because what comes next is still the same demand for our children to live in a community where they don't have to live in fear of these mass shootings, of these weapons of war on our streets. When I saw that video of John Lewis, it made me emotional because I was an intern in Washington when he led that sit-in. I remember sitting outside the House, sitting outside the Capitol building in D.C. until 2 or 3 a.m. waiting for them to come out. I'm 27 years old now, formerly was the youngest black lawmaker in Tennessee, and I just know that good trouble is exactly what we were doing. And so thank you for playing that clip of Congressman John Lewis.
Representative Gloria Johnson told us the day before the expulsion that HR came to see her and said that if she resigned, she could keep her health care, and that if she was expelled, she would lose it. Did you get the same visit from HR?
No, HR did not come to my office. No one came to my office, so we didn't know the rules of how that hearing would go. We didn't understand the process. It was a kangaroo court, and so it seemed like they were making up rules and decisions moment by moment. So no one came to my office, and no one spoke to me until the day of our hearing about 30 minutes before.
Can you tell our viewers what rights you do and don't have in the super minority in the Texas legislature, and what, in their view, Tennessee legislature, what in the Tennessee legislature you were not allowed to do? Because I think a lot of people are missing this piece, that you were not allowed to give voice to your own constituents. That seems to most people like the most basic function of a representative in a state legislature.
I mean, definitely, again, I'm 27, and you often hear if you want to do something, you can run for office. So I ran for office, was elected, and went into the legislature hoping I could voice these concerns for my district. You were shut down in committee. They don't call on you to speak on bills. They just call the question without any type of deliberation because they have 75 members. We had 24. Now there's only 22 Democrats. I mean, it's a party, and it is a supermajority that is drunk with power. And the world saw yesterday there's no democracy in Tennessee. Our legislature is the opposite. It is autocracy, and it should scare us all. That day, the day of our protest, in fact, that whole week, we tried to talk about the crisis of mass shootings following the massacre at Covenant Elementary School, and rather than let us talk, they shut us down. They turned off our microphones. When I went outside to just go stand in solidarity with the protesters, I came back in and my voting machine was cut off, something that I had never seen on the House floor because the speaker said you can't go in and out anymore, though that was never a rule enforced. Just the whole process was a mockery of democracy, and it's really scary with yesterday's vote, the precedent that has been set for the nation and other states to follow.
What do you think Republicans thought would happen? Do you think they thought you'd go quietly, we wouldn't notice that they expelled and disenfranchised your constituents?
I think a lot of people were shocked about the hearing yesterday and shocked about what they witnessed, but that was actually them tame. This is the normal type of arrogance of power that we see on full display every time I work in that building, and it's very hard being a young black man to work in a legislature where you have such political hubris and arrogance and condescension. I think they thought that no one, they had ultimate authority and that no one would challenge them because they're so used to shutting down any voices of opposition. You see, they expelled us. They thought it would be over because it wasn't about us, though. It was about our movement, which is why we are still here, which is why the world is watching. Instead of, silencing the movement, they put a spotlight on Tennessee and the shame of our legislature that is so counter to democracy, and that is a symbol for America of our deepest shame, which is trying to bring us back to 1963 instead of 2023.
It is clear that we were on the air when your vote was taking place, and shame is what the protesters assembled, and they were all ages. They were male and female. I'm sure many were your constituents, but they seemed to come from all over Tennessee. It is clear that your position on gun safety legislation is the position of the majority of your state. What reforms are necessary for that body to not be so broken that it doesn't even represent the people of Tennessee?
I mean, we have a party that has hijacked our democratic process by rigged maps, voter suppression. In Tennessee, 1 in 5 black men can't vote because of felony disenfranchisement. I mean, we have a party that has stolen our democracy, and so that the will of the voters is erased in order to appeal to the NRA and the Tennessee Firearms Association. Just this week, in the aftermath of that mass shooting at Covenant, the Education Committee pushed forward a bill to allow teachers to carry guns in schools, though all the teachers who were there testified against it. I mean, this party is so arrogant, and it's being led by Speaker Cameron Sexton, who is an extremist and who's pushing this very harmful agenda, not just for us, but for our children and generations to come.
Your colleague, former Representative Justin Pearson, talked about knowing people who'd lost their lives to gun violence. Gloria Johnson also talked about surviving a school shooting as a teacher. Your state is grieving. I believe when these protests erupted, all the funerals hadn't taken place for the 6 people, 3 9-year-old children who'd been murdered in that school shooting. Was there ever any consideration from the Republicans there to join hands with the Democrats and propose anything that Tennesseans would like to see on the topic of gun safety legislation?
Not at all. Their only proposals were to put our heads into the sand and ignore the issue. They proposed putting more locks on doors, more security, but these are not solutions to weapons of war in our streets. This is a uniquely American problem, and in a state that is so obsessive and that almost worships gun culture. Our governor signed a slew of gun bills in a gun factory. I mean, it's just so... It's so scary, and we should all be alarmed at what's happening in Tennessee. We can't even talk. There's no opportunity to collaborate. The speaker intimidates members and tries to get us to just bow down and back down. And in committee, if you don't, your microphone's cut off. Even before I was expelled, my ID badge was shut off. I was kicked off my committees. I was shut out of the parking garage. I couldn't even park in the legislative parking garage anymore. Just petty things to try and silence voices of dissent. And it's very scary. And the nation saw exactly what we're dealing with in Tennessee. And if it can happen in Tennessee, the warning is that it can happen anywhere in America. So Congresswoman Barbara Lee was on while your vote was taking place, and she became emotional when this vote to actually expel you had happened. Even though you were expecting it, what were your emotions at that moment? I mean, it didn't feel real, to be quite honest. We went through that hour-long hearing, and they asked all these questions, and they got to the vote, and they had the votes. It was completely partisan. That was historic in Tennessee history. And I hugged my colleagues. Told them it was a pleasure to work with you all, because I have enjoyed work. My Democratic colleagues, I should say, it was a pleasure to work with them. And I went to go take my nameplate off my desk, packed my bag, and I walked up to the gallery to go wait for my other 2 colleagues to let them know I'm in solidarity with them. But it was surreal, because it's something that if I didn't know what was happening to me, I wouldn't know that we were in America anymore.
Yeah, that's what it felt like watching. I saw you go and hug Representative Gloria Johnson, and then I saw the throngs of press waiting for you outside, and we were glad to hear your comments afterward. You started by saying that the speaker still has a lot of control about what happens next, but if the path is cleared legally and procedurally for you to return to the legislature, will you return?
Definitely. I mean, there are 78,000 people in District 52, one of the most diverse districts in Tennessee, that don't have a voice right now. And I was elected because I was going to fight for them, and I will continue to fight for them, whether I'm inside or outside the chamber. And so I definitely would come back. The question is if he'll seat me, but that will be another battle, because I believe that this decision yesterday was unconstitutional. I believe that if he tries to refuse to seat me, it would be unconstitutional. But we know that we have a supermajority that yesterday they just burned the state constitution. They do not believe in our constitution, it seems like. They just believe that they have ultimate power and that any voice of opposition must be silenced. And so we'll see what the speaker does. But what I can tell you is that they've lost an entire generation, that all these young people, the thousands who are gathered watching them, they have lost them, and that this party, their power is temporary, that the speaker's time is coming to an end, and that these young people, when they turn out and vote, when they use their power, we will transform this state, and in doing so, transform this nation.
Justin Jones, we were transfixed by everything you had to say yesterday, and the way you and Representative Johnson and former Representative Pearson spoke to the public and brought us through exactly what was taking place. So for doing that for all of us, thank you very much. We'll stay on this, and you always have an invitation to be a part of these conversations. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. I know there are a lot of demands on your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Basil, I don't know where to start. You go.
Well, the two things that he said, the first that, when you're thinking about the fact that he represents tens of thousands of people.
77,000, yeah.
People who've put their hopes and dreams and aspirations for themselves and their children in his hands. I've run for office before, Rev has run for office before. My little state senate seat that I tried to run for some years ago. When a voter comes up and says, I believe in you, and you tell them and promise them that I'm going to help make your life better if you support me, that is just an incredible bond you have with the voter. And he took that seriously. He took it to the State House, and to see how just methodically they stripped away piece after piece of him to get rid of the opportunity he had to represent those individuals, just heartbreaking. The New York Public Advocate's name is Jumaane Williams. He says something all the time that I really embrace, and I do in this moment. When people say the system is broken, he'll say, and I absolutely agree, the system is working exactly the way it was intended to promote and to shield people in positions of power, to suppress those that do not. And that's what he's calling attention to. That's what Justin Jones is calling attention to, that there are folks in this country who are afraid of the changes that are coming in this country, and they're using every weapon in their toolbox to suppress and oppress.
But Justin Jones is not cynical. He's more optimistic than I feel.
I think that you have to be optimistic to go out and fight this every day. And you have to really, at some point, you almost feel sorry for your adversaries, as mean-spirited as they are, because they don't understand you cannot fight what is happening, because a time has come that your time of doing what you did the way you did it is coming to an end. People are not accepting that anymore. Think about that. Not only does Jones represent 78,000, they voted for a 27-year-old. I mean, the speaker needs to wake up and realize, when you see 20-year-olds getting elected in Tennessee, black with an afro, this is not Archie Bunker days anymore. Right. So in many ways, you pity their stupidity for themselves, but at the same time, you must fight. And again, I underscore how proud I am. And I talked to Representative Jones earlier today, even after talking to him on Morning Joe, how proud I am to see another generation. I mean, I learned from the John Lewis, Jesse Jackson generation. They're doing it, and they're doing it with dignity. They're doing it where they really couldn't say there was one altercation out there, and they're fighting to stop people from being able to kill people. I mean, let's not forget
all of our
the
kids.
bigger
They're
picture.
Fighting for everybody.
They're fighting for our kids. What are you angry at? I mean, you have this kind of venom. Even if you disagree with them, why would you have the venom for people fighting for your grandchildren not to get shot in school, other than you're a bigot and your emotions are driving you? Boys, you get in your place. You understand me? You get in your place. Because other than that, why would you have that kind of venom for people that's just begging to maintain lives?
It's amazing. All right, we are going to make a slight pivot here, but we're going to have that conversation that the Rev is talking about. David Jolly, thank you for being part of our coverage today. Up next, how the emotion of the last 2 weeks is hitting activists who have lived through all of this before. Our dear friend Fred Guttenberg joins us, along with Florida Congressman Jared Moskowitz. Don't go anywhere. We'll have that conversation next.
Like fourth grade kids writing signs about not wanting guns in their schools. it's ridiculous that they're just like, let's throw more guns at the problem.
The Tennessee legislature has been increasingly turning to extremist actions, and we're saying we won't stand for it. We know it's not drag. We know it's not books that's harming children that has been banned in the name of protecting kids. It's guns, and it's killing every single day.
The reality is there are some people who are silent. They're dead. There are 3 9-year-olds who will never serve in this General Assembly, who will never be able to march, who will never be able to protest, who will never be able to raise their voice about this issue. Someone with an assault rifle went into the school and shot 152 rounds. What reason does any reasonable person have to have an assault rifle?
Protesters at the Tennessee Capitol, including the other Justin, the other ousted member of the legislature, former Representative Justin Pearson, begging politicians there to take action, to do something to save the lives of Tennesseans ahead of potentially the next mass shooting. They want them to do something, anything that could have a meaningful impact on the epidemic of gun violence in their state and across the country. It has not even been 2 weeks since the shooter at the Covenant School took the lives of 6 people there, including 9-year-olds Hallie Scruggs, Evelyn Dykehouse, and William Kinney, as well as substitute teacher Cynthia Peak, the custodian Mike Hill, and the head of school Catherine Coons. That state's proposed solutions so far have been funding for more security guards and pushing for arming the teachers. And while the legislature was busy expelling members of the body for speaking out against this uniquely American plague, the Gun Violence Archive tweeting that this year so far there have been 4,686 deaths due to gun violence, 141 mass shootings, and 65 children killed by guns. But let's spam the bullhorns, guys. Joining our conversation, Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida. I wanted you to be from California. I'm sorry. Of Florida. He's a graduate of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And our dear friend, Fred Guttenberg, is back. His daughter, Jamie, of course, was killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. He is the co-author of the book, American Carnage, Shattering the Myths That Fuel Gun Violence. Fred, I've been thinking about you all week. And I've been thinking that this has to be so traumatic and so triggering. And so I respected your space at the beginning of the week, but I couldn't make it through the whole week without talking to you. So now here you are. Tell me what you've been thinking.
You know, the day the shooting happened, excuse me, you tried to get me on the show that day. I couldn't do it. I actually was on vacation. I was trying to take my first genuine mental health break in 5 years. And Nicolle, since that day, I've actually been kind of feeling sorry for myself while feeling depressed and down over what I've been watching unfold in Tennessee. And then this morning, I went to the cemetery to visit Jamie. And Jared's on this interview. And for those who have followed our story, you know I consider Jared one of my closest friends, but that happened because of gun violence. Jared called me not knowing I was at the cemetery. And so we spoke for a brief minute. It's where I had to go to get grounded, to get refocused, to get centered. Because at the end of the day, it is always about the victims of gun violence. I am over any feelings of sadness for myself. But I want to say this about Tennessee and to the racists who serve in that state, who have been peddling a series of lies over what they think about democracy, what they think about guns, and clearly now what they think of victims of gun violence. Because what's amazing is they've skipped right over the thoughts and prayers part. It didn't even exist after this shooting. They went right to the bullshit, excuse my language. And so I'm really furious, but I gotta tell you, I'm also watching the two Justins, Pearson and Jones, and I've rarely been as inspired. You know, at the end of my book, Find the Helpers, the very last paragraph is a message to young people where I tell them, you will have moments in your life, some bigger than others, And what matters more than the moment is not the moment. It's what you did next. It's what you do next that will always define you. And those two amazing young men will never be defined by that vote yesterday. They are going to be defined by everything they have done since, and they are going to be defined by what they will do going forward when they lead Tennessee and this country, and they show us the best of democracy. And I will go back to the racists that they are now going to take on. If you think your fear, if you think your weakness of what you don't understand is going to stop them, bring it. Because I'm going to Tennessee, I'm going to join them, and so will people from across this country. Yesterday was a defining moment, and those two amazing young men, they have inspired me in a way that I never, ever thought could happen over the past week.
But I don't see them as disconnected from you. You and Maxwell Frost and Justin, the two Justins, Jones and Pearson, now former representatives, and Gloria Johnson are all part of this. You know, I'm from San Francisco, so there's always an earthquake analogy in here. But there's this push, right, before the violent breaking of the tectonic plates. And that's what I think has happened. I think you put it into motion. I think the Parkland survivors, in honor of Jamie and the other friends and colleagues they lost, I think it's all been put in motion. And I think what the Republicans haven't woken up to yet is that voters aren't so stupid that will disaggregate an assault on the whole democracy, on our right to be safe in school, on our right to make our own health care decisions about our body, on our right to vote. They need us to be out fighting those fights separately, right? Women fighting for health care, young people fight. But the problem is they're so brazen and they're so emboldened that they've lumped it all together, and we see them. And I think you pushed one of those first boulders down the hill, Fred.
You know, but what makes them emboldened is they took advantage of a fact that Americans, as a general rule of thumb, did a terrible job of voting. And what I mean by that is not enough of us have voted. And they knew that. And they've taken advantage of that to put themselves in the position that they're in now. Voting solves problems. And I just have to believe that with everything you just laid out, you're going to see an epic turnout, and you are going to see Americans show up in the voting booths unlike ever before. And I've listened to your show all day today, as well as on other days, where we talk about the young people. And the young people are amazing, and we need to keep them inspired in voting. Excuse me, my allergies. But here's the thing. Older people like me, you need to show up and vote as well. You can't sit home. And moms who keep going out and fighting for safety heroically, they need to be joined by dads. You know, it is time for people to stop waiting for someone else to solve it. Because if you don't become a part of the solution, the next time it's going to be someone you love.
I want to bring Congressman Moskowitz into this. He called you. What did you have to say to him on this call from the cemetery? Or you called him and you didn't know he was at the cemetery. Can you tell us about that conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, first of all, Nicole, thanks for having me. I called to check in with Fred. I know every time there's another shooting, especially at a school, it triggers all of the parents, especially, you know, Parkland was something that inspired the country, inspired a lot of young people. And what happened in Tennessee, for different reasons, I wanted to talk to Fred and what his thoughts are, because I think the Republican snowflakes in the legislature made a terrible miscalculation. I think for someone who served in the minority in the Florida House before, your vote is irrelevant. What you have is your voice. And what the Republicans in the legislature have done to Justin Squared is they have given these two gentlemen a voice now much larger than they ever had by being in the super minority in the legislature. And so, they made a horrible mistake, the Republicans did, by doing this. In fact, you're already hearing that the council may appoint one of the Justins back in their position as the interim. And so this story is not over. This will bring more attention to the issue. I mean, we've heard a lot about, books. I mean, look, Nicolle, I'm sure there are books that don't belong in school. And look, I'll join my Republican colleagues on finding the books that, might be inappropriate for certain ages. And we've heard a lot about drag queens. And look, I'll join my Republican colleagues because obviously there's material that isn't age appropriate. But when are they going to join us on the number one threat to children, which is gun violence, which is people who don't have the mental capacity to have weapons of war, being able to get weapons of war very easily? When are they going to join us on trying to deal with the gun violence epidemic, which is the number one threat to school children? And so that's what Fred and I talk about. We talk about how we're inspired by these two representatives, how the Tennessee Republicans showed their true colors. And I think they made a horrific political mistake. But Fred and I like to talk about the positives of these things that happen, because obviously, if we dwell on the fact that 5 years later from Parkland, we're still dealing, even with the progress we've made, and we've made progress. Every time you secure a school, every time you put an SRO in, every time you pass red flag laws, you are mitigating the damage. But Fred and I know that until we ban assault weapons and get AR-15s off the streets, kids are just not going to be safe in their schools.
Fred, I don't know if you can see this, but to our other conversation about what's been put in motion, the Vice President of the United States is wheels down in Tennessee, I think. Can we see that picture again? She has changed her schedule, and she's traveling to Nashville to meet with the 3 Democratic representatives and the super minority there. But to your point, everybody's listening. To Justin Jones' point, the world was watching yesterday.
Well, and I'll add one more group that needs to listen and react, and it's the business community. There are companies, manufacturers like Nissan, Volkswagen, and others that have set down shop in Tennessee. They employ a lot of people, and they took a lot of Tennessee tax dollars while meeting with these racist legislators to get those factories planted there. They need to speak out. They need to say, we're not okay with this. The business community needs to call out the racism in that legislature, needs to call out those who did this. Or Americans should stop buying those particular cars. We should stop. You know what? Listen, Nicolle, Republicans have been emboldened because they've been able to say things and get away with it because it never seemed like it was going to go further. Mm-hmm. They're now at a place where we know it's just going to, if they get this one, they will go further. And so it is now time for an all hands on deck for voters, for legislators, for media, and for the business community that has benefited from decisions by those legislators to step up and do the right thing. Or we Americans, we get to vote in the voting booth, but also with our dollar.
Fred Kemberg, Congressman Jared Moskowitz, the Reverend Al Sharpton, Basil Smikle, thank you all so much for this conversation. A very short break for us. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with trans rights activist and lawyer Chase Strangio about the tidal wave of anti-trans legislation.
If you think about what happens if the Senate majority shifts and the presidency shifts, we're having a federal ban on this care, just like we're having a federal ban on abortion, most likely. And what does that mean nationally? We're not prepared for that eventuality. But once they're moving all these bills so quickly and creating this sense that this is somehow a legitimate paradigm shift to cut people off from this treatment, that then paves the way for a huge amount of other intrusions.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel." We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. The revelations about just what happened between the ex-president and the Secret Service on January 6th were among the most shocking and unexpected moments from the Select Committee's public hearings. And when it was discovered that the Secret Service's text messages from January 6th and 5th were all deleted, it raised all sorts of questions. Joseph Kafari, the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the Secret Service, was the one who told Congress that all those texts were missing. But he did so months after already knowing they were gone, that they were lost. Former committee member Zoe Lofgren raised the alarm bells about that and about that IG on this program back in July.
Honestly, I'm concerned that the Inspector General has sat on this information for a considerable period of time. We just learned about it last Thursday. It's been a week. He's known about it for months and months and months. Why didn't he tell us before now? Why did we learn only now from the Secret Service and the Inspector General about this? We're going to try and find out as much as we can. It's not just the text messages, obviously, that we're interested in, but all of the communications in that the Secret Service has.
It was a real moment in the committee's work. It was like that sound of a needle swiping across a record, if you're old enough to remember what that sounds like. So after the public outcry, the committee later did receive a lot of records from the Secret Service, but not the text, and questions remained around the IG. Well, now there's brand new reporting in the Washington Post that says this, quote, a nearly 2-year investigation into allegations of misconduct by the Department of Homeland Security's chief watchdog expanded this week to include his role in missing Secret Service text messages from the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. On Monday, investigators demanded records related to the deleted text from the Office of Inspector General Joseph Kafari, an appointee of President Donald Trump, whose office shut down an inquiry into the Secret Service messages last year amid the House's probe of the insurrection. Hearing from the Secret Service was a crucial piece to the puzzle that the committee was piecing together. The committee played for the public audio of a White House security professional describing what they heard from incoming radio traffic that day, a glimpse into what Secret Service agents were thinking when it came to the then president's safety and theirs.
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
It was a stunning detail in the moment. There was some skepticism, but nobody ever came out and publicly refuted that anecdote. And it showed just how little the public and the congressional committee ever learned about what really happened with Pence and his detail on the 6th, one of the last big outstanding questions that special counsel Jack Smith may soon be one step closer to being able to answer. We learned this week that Mike Pence will not appeal the ruling that he must now testify before the grand jury in Smith's probe. Pence's testimony could amount to a significant breakthrough in this extremely consequential investigation, looking to hold those who incited the deadly insurrection accountable for an attempted coup that has already seen more than 1,000 rioters charged for their crimes on that day. It's where we start the hour. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She's a former member of the House January 6 Select Committee. With us at the table, former Justice Department prosecutor, former senior member of Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation, Andrew Weissman, is back. And Harry Litman's here, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, former U.S. Attorney. Congresswoman, I start with you. Just take us inside what you were able to piece together through the documents you did receive. There was a big dump of emails, I I believe we talked about. But there's still some sort of a black box of unknown whereabouts and unknown disposition of the text messages, right?
I think that's correct. And we did find out, I mean, Liz Cheney and I really went through the roof Labor Day of last year, insisting that we get documents. The Secretary of Homeland Security was very supportive, but we were getting inconsistent results. Let me just put it that way, until the Secretary assigned someone who'd been a prior official, and whereupon we got over 1 million documents the following Monday. And I don't know whether they thought we couldn't get through it all, but we did. We had people working weekends, nights, lawyers in from other committees to get information that did shed some light on us. One of the things that we learned was that the text messages from the Secret Service were not stored in the cloud in a way that we would ordinarily expect. There was records, obviously, that were destroyed. Other officials in the Department of Homeland Security did use the cloud to store their text messages, but at this point, they would not be safe. We found out from the Inspector General way after he knew, and as soon as we found out, we had him and his staff come in to brief us, but we didn't get a lot of information from them. And then later on, he suppressed the capacity to investigate, which troubled me a great deal. So let me just say, I think there's a lot left that's not known about what the Secret Service did in the days, and certainly the day of the riot.
And this is Mr. Kafari,
Right.
Yeah. So this is what the Washington Post is reporting, that this new records request was revealed in a federal lawsuit filed by him, Mr. Kafari, and his staff against the panel of inspectors leading the probe, suggesting new urgency in this high-profile investigation that began with your work. What would the commitment be at this point to continuing to hide this? Why continue to keep this secret? What do you think is sort of the ongoing, what is he trying to cover up in an ongoing manner?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. It would just be speculation on my part. But when someone seeks to, especially an inspector general, keep information from moving out into the public arena, it does raise suspicions. I don't have any inside info, but I am heartened to know that the investigation is ongoing into his conduct, which has been troublesome in more ways than just the January 6th inquiry. So that's important. What, if anything, he's trying to hide, that investigation needs to uncover.
Mike Pence will not fight a subpoena to appear before the grand jury investigating the insurrection. We had a chance to speak to your former colleague, Tim Hafey, about where, I mean, the probe got very close to Pence through Mr. Short, his chief of staff, Mr. Jacob, his chief counsel, testimony like the one I just played about his Secret Service detail. But what would he sort of open up that the committee wasn't able to learn from those very senior aides?
Well, there were a lot of interactions he had with the president and some others who were involved in the president's plot that his staff was unable to testify to. They didn't always know about it. I think he really knows a very great deal about the then president's efforts to overturn the election. Unlike Mark Meadows and others, there's no criminal exposure that I could even imagine for the vice president. So he will not assert the Fifth Amendment. And now he will testify, I'm sure, fully and honestly about everything he saw and heard. And I think that's likely to be quite a bit.
So we pieced together a bit of a timeline with Pence, and Tim Hafey widened it even further back to the summer to suggest that Jack Smith might want to know when the plan to rig the election, or say it was rigged if he lost, was put into motion. The committee introduced an email from Mr. Tom Fitton that was dated, I think, in July before the election that certainly earlied up the timeline. And then we have some dates in January, but just generally speaking, what is sort of your scope of questions about what span would you want to talk to Mike Pence about?
Well, I think all of it. Tim obviously was the head investigator for the committee. The ex-president himself started showing indications of intending to overthrow the election in the spring, prior to June. But we also had, as you mentioned, the record of his assistant talking about that. We don't know what Pence knew and when he knew it. But I would assume that DOJ will be asking all those questions, and I'm confident that the former vice president will answer. We were unable to talk to him, to question him, and I think you would start probably in April when the former president started to publicly question whether he would adhere to the result and just go forward. I mean, he talked to Eastman, he talked to others. The call that he had with the ex-president the morning of the 6th will be enlightening, I'm sure, and is also permitted under the court ruling. So we'll learn a lot, I think, from what he says to the DOJ.
Well, and just on one of the 4 crimes that the committee referred, the obstruction of an official proceeding, I'm sure Trump's intent was laid bare to Mike Pence in that call that morning when he reportedly called him the P word.
Well, he heard that, but, we had some information from his staff, but the vice president took the call upstairs in his residence. So his staff did not hear all of it. And of course, Meadows refused to testify. So we don't have all of that call. And I'm sure the president must be burned in his memory. So I'm sure the vice president will be able to tell us.
So if you're Jack Smith and you start with the 6th, I mean, that's certainly something you want to understand, Mike Pence's version of that call between Pence and Trump. But if you go back to the 5th, I mean, that's when the vice president's chief of staff warned that the vice president could be targeted with violence. You go back to the 4th, that's when Pence, Trump, and Eastman were in the Oval together. You go back to the 3rd, that's when the DOJ coup plot took place. Just take me through what sort of warm knife through cold butter Jack Smith can cut when he gets Pence's version of all of those days.
Well, I think Pence had insight into much of the plot. Because he was being pressured to be part of the plot, which he declined to do ultimately. So it's really a bonanza for the special counsel in terms of information. One of the questions, getting back to your earlier question about the Secret Service, we've never really I don't think we got a good explanation why, with the knowledge that the Secret Service had, the then vice president was sent over to the Capitol knowing there would be a mob that would be armed with just a small detail. He barely escaped. As you heard, his detail was afraid that they would lose their lives. And we knew actually on the morning of the 6th that the mob was armed. I mean, they refused to go through the magnetometer. And yet, the Secret Service allowed that to happen. I've never gotten a satisfactory answer to that.
Congresswoman, stay with us. I want to bring Andrew Weissman and Harry Lippman in. I mean, we've talked, and maybe we've emphasized too much his intent to obstruct the official proceeding. But the vice president and his chief of staff had knowledge of violence. So did, through the transcripts released by the committee, Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor, who warned on the 5th that there was going to be, quote, violence on the Hill. I mean, how much do you think Jack Smith is probing both the violence and the foreknowledge of violence, as well as the intent to obstruct the actual goings on?
This is one where it's both. There's no reason not to do both. I was interested to ask the Congresswoman about something you were following up on, which is the January 5th component, because I think it does go to the former president's state of mind. I'm particularly interested on January 5th, where, if memory serves, that's when the former president sends out a text. I mean, it's when I guess he was still tweeting. So,
yes.
And there's a tweet saying that the vice president agrees with me.
Right.
That that the vice president has the power to not go forward. And I think one of the key things that you could get from Pence is not just that he disagreed with that, but that the president knew that at the time, that he didn't in any way communicate to the president that that was accurate. And the reason that is so important is that goes to, if you can show that the president was lying on the 5th, that just really, to me, I know as former prosecutors at the table, that to me goes a long way to establish what he was trying to accomplish on the 6th. I mean, it's just the day before. And I don't know if that strikes you as right or whether I'm missing something as to what the vice president could give to Jack Smith.
Well, I think he certainly could do that. And they had a meeting after the 6th, sort of brokered by Ivanka to sort of get the vice president and ex-president together. I'd like to know about that as well. But yes, there's a lot of evidence that we compiled that the then president knew that what he was saying about the law was false. He was told that multiple times by people, and the vice president knew that. He sought outside information on it. So the president knew what he was saying was not true. And he knew, I mean, really, I think if you look at all the evidence, he tried multiple ways to overturn the election through the fake electors, through trying to get the legislators together, through trying to corrupt the Department of Justice. And by the time trying to get the vice president to refuse to open the ballots, to send them back. And at the end, all he had left was mob violence to prevent the proceedings. And that's what he tried to do.
Congresswoman, a lot of what we were sort of left still wondering about by the end was the role that Republican members of the House and a few senators played. What is your sort of lasting theory of the case in terms of how much Pence was aware of that? I mean, they obviously went and voted against what he certifies, so they didn't agree with his move. I think that might even include his brother. But how much did the committee suspect or want to understand Pence to know about Republican House and senators who participated in the coup plot?
I'll say we didn't get evidence that he was a participant in these plots, but we do believe and did believe that he had insight into what was going on. We know that on December 21st, quite a few Republican members of Congress went over and met with the then president, but none of them would talk to us. So we'd like to know more about that meeting.
Whatever you say.
From some of the texts, it looks like, they were hatching the plot right there in the Oval Office.
Yeah, I mean, Harry, one of the things that I think is abundantly clear is that Pence was in the room with Eastman and heard the whole fantastical, extravagant, eccentric, unconstitutional, illegal plot laid out to him because they were pitching him. And when you're pitching someone, you don't trim your sails. You don't make it sound more legal or less You go for the gusto. They were selling him. He knows the entire plot to illegally overturn the election result.
They went for the gusto, and then they went for the, punch to the jaw. Look, Pence is the victim. The Congresswoman's committee set out 3 or 4 different schemes, but the really sort of end one and the most grave was January 6th itself. In a sense, Pence is the victim there, there is evidence of, one, the phone call, but also a meeting in the wings of the Oval Office that Pence alone knows. And that is probably the strongest evidence there is. But then, in addition, there's all the things we don't know. He was apparently having his weekly lunches with Trump before the election, after the election. All that stuff could be big. All the stuff with Eastman. But if nothing else, the 2 or 3 conversations that are, as far as I can tell, bury Trump on the specific charge of trying to obstruct the January 6th certification vote, because after all, Pence was the guy that they needed to do that. So he next to Mark Meadows is just the most important witness for January 6th, I think. And
Congresswoman, there seems to be a really basic and simple, maybe obvious question. Did you think you won? I mean, he didn't, right? I mean, in some of the most dramatic testimony you guys presented was Ivanka. Did you think your dad won? I agreed with Bill Barr, was I think what she said with 11 filters on her face. I mean, isn't that kind of basic information for a jury pretty powerful?
It is, but the question is, what did the president know? And there's substantial, really irrefutable evidence that he was told over and over again by his own people that he lost, and he knew he lost. We even have some evidence where he relayed to others that he knew that he lost. He was acting as if he had lost. So I don't think there's really any confusion about that. But the former vice president will, in fact, be able to fill out that information. He was intimately involved with what the president was saying, doing. You're right with the Eastman scheme that was unconstitutional. Even Eastman knew it was unlawful. I just think the Department of Justice is going to get quite a lot of information from the former vice president. As I said earlier, I don't know if Meadows will take the fifth. He has substantial criminal exposure. There are others who have criminal exposure, may also take the fifth. But the former vice president is going to go in and I think answer fully what he's asked.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, thank you very much for being here today. Andrew and Harry, stick around. We are keeping a close eye on Nashville, where just a few minutes ago, Vice President Kamala Harris landed. She's set to meet with the expelled Democratic state representatives. If there are any developments there, we'll bring them right to you. Coming up next for us, just a day after an extraordinary report detailed how Justice Clarence Thomas went on luxury vacations and yacht trips with the GOP mega donor and did not disclose them. There's brand new reporting that reveals that he has reported just two gifts since the year 2004. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, everybody, it's Savannah Guthrie.
And I'm Hoda Kotb, and we've got some great news to share.
The Today Show is now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Can you believe that? Right now, you can get your daily dose of news and headlines and the day's top interviews from us right here every single morning.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day, wherever you get your podcasts.
So why not subscribe and follow today to start listening?
I don't have any problem with going to Europe, but I prefer the United States, and I prefer seeing the regular parts of the United States. I prefer going across the rural areas. I prefer the RV parks. I prefer the Walmart parking lots to the beaches and things like that. There's something normal to me about it. I come from regular stock, and I prefer that. I prefer being around that.
You understand why we're laughing. That was Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, a man of the people who loves Walmart parking lots. At least that's what he'd have you believe. But just the existence of that clip contradicts that. It's from a 2020 documentary about his life called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words. And he was financed by a super yacht owning dude named Harlan Crow, who, according to some extraordinary new reporting in ProPublica, who has blown open something people have been reporting for years now, has gifted Justice Thomas a lavish lifestyle, including vacations over the course of their friendship, vacations that Thomas accepted and never disclosed. Crow is a real estate magnate. He's a Republican mega donor. He has a history of spending millions of dollars on ideological efforts to shape and reshape the law and the judiciary. Well, he maintains that they never talked on the super yacht about any pending or lower court cases with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Quote, the extent and frequency of Crow's apparent gifts to Thomas have no known precedent in the modern history of the United States Supreme Court. The most eyebrow-raising part of all this, Justice Clarence Thomas kept the gifts a secret. Nobody knew. More from ProPublica. Quote, these trips appeared nowhere on Justice Thomas's financial disclosures. His failure to report the flights appears to violate a law passed after Watergate that requires justices, judges, members of Congress, and federal officials to disclose most gifts, two ethics law experts say. In a statement, that there is a statement is news here. So in a statement, Justice Thomas insists that he, quote, was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close personal friends who did not have business before the court was not reportable. Yeah, because we all have close personal friends who are Republican mega donors. What? And it turns out that Justice Thomas's practice of not reporting what he calls personal hospitality dates back to 2004. The Washington Post says he's reported 2 gifts since 2004. If you've forgotten, it is 2023, ladies and gentlemen. 2004 was when the LA Times reported that Clarence Thomas had accepted private plane trips and gifts paid for by, wait for it, Harlan Crow. Joining us, ProPublica Deputy Managing Editor Eric Umansky, Andrew Weissman, and Harry Littman are still here. Eric, this is an unbelievable body of reporting. It's an incredibly meticulously reported story. It is conservative. It is restrained in drawing conclusions. It's the rest of us that have drawn them. But just take me through the exquisitely reporting news story that you have here.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So what we found was that Justice Thomas has been regularly taking, as you said, luxury trips as a guest of a Republican mega donor and a real estate magnate from Dallas named Harlan Crow for years and years. And those trips have frequently involved going on Harlan Crow's private jet and then going on Crow's super yacht. One of the trips they took, for example, they took the private jet to the super yacht to go island hopping in Indonesia, where they visited Komodo dragons and, enjoyed beaches and so forth. And as you said, this has been what we found is it's been going on for years. And it has never been disclosed by Justice Thomas. And again, what we have heard and from, I think it's now 7 different ethics experts, Republicans and Democrats, is that the law is quite clear on this, with some exceptions. Gifts need to be disclosed, even though the Supreme Court has very few rules on ethics. One of them is that gifts need to be disclosed. One of the few exceptions is if you're essentially staying at somebody's personal home. But something like taking a private jet just needs to be disclosed.
Yeah, and I mean, the spirit is if you're at their home, you don't need to report, the bagels and cream cheese you have for breakfast. It's not, the yacht you use for island hopping and the private jet that gets you there to see the Komodo dragons. So where there's a Clarence Thomas scandal, there's usually a Ginny Thomas chapter. Let me read what you report about her. Quote, Crow met Thomas after he became a justice. The pair have become genuine friends. That's according to people who know both men. Over the years, some details of Crow's relationship with the Thomases have emerged. In 2011, the New York Times reported on Crow's generosity toward the justice. That same year, Politico revealed that Crow had given $500,000 to a Tea Party group founded by Ginny Thomas, which also paid her $120,000 salary. But the full scale of Crow's benefactions has never been revealed. I worked in government, and your financial disclosure always includes your spouse's behavior, because you don't have to even be a smart snake to figure out that giving to the politician's spouse or kids is a way to get right at them. I mean, what do we know about Ginny Thomas? I mean, just this reporting suggests she took a salary and a big donation from Crow.
Well, from Thomas's financial disclosures, we know very little, because, as you mentioned, there have been few such details disclosed. And, one of the issues here is, again, the Supreme Court lives in very much a policing itself rules vacuum. And so there are these rules about disclosures, but Thomas appears not to have followed them. We know very few details. And so I think that there's a lot more to find out here.
I mean, Eric, there's something sort of meta about Crow funding a dock where Thomas doesn't say anything about jets and super yachts, but says, I like Walmart parking lots and RVs. Why is he part of... Go ahead.
I was just going to point out one fun fact, which is that in one of those clips where he is saying exactly that, if you were to zoom in on his polo shirt, Justice Thomas's polo shirt, it bears the logo of Harlan Crow's super yacht, which he gives to guests.
My God, you could not make this up. If you were a critic of the court and wanted to show how hypocritical they are and how they do not live by the laws that the rest of us do, you could not manufacture this. It's an amazing piece of reporting. I'm going to ask you to stick around through a break. I want to bring Andrew and Harry in on the questioning. Afterward, we're going to stay on this. We're going to push a little deeper. And we're going to talk about what it means for the rest of the justices and the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who says a whole lot of things about feeling bad and sad about looming questions over the court's legitimacy. Stay with us.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with trans rights activist and lawyer Chase Strangio about the tidal wave of anti-trans legislation.
If you think about what happens if the Senate majority shifts and the presidency shifts, we're having a federal ban on this care, just like we're having a federal ban on abortion, most likely. And what does that mean nationally? We're not prepared for that eventuality. But once they're moving all these bills so quickly and creating this sense that this is somehow a legitimate paradigm shift to cut people off from this treatment, that then paves the way for a huge amount of other intrusions.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
That is entirely appropriate. That citizens feel free to criticize our opinions and how we do our work. But lately, the criticism is phrased in terms of, because of these opinions, it calls into question the legitimacy of the court. And I think it's a mistake to view those criticisms in that light. The legitimacy of the court rests on the fact that it satisfies the requirements of the statute and that the Constitution needs, as John Marshall put it, somebody to say what the law is, and that's the role of the Supreme Court. And that role doesn't change simply because people disagree with this opinion or that opinion or disagree with a particular mode of jurisprudence.
So in 2000, when the Supreme Court famously took up Bush v. Gore, 75% of Americans had a great deal, a fair amount of trust in the court. It has plunged 30 points. As we sit here today, only 47% of all Americans have a, quote, great deal or fair amount of trust in the court. Eric, I want to ask you a question, and then I want to let Andrew get in on this as well. What is the reaction to your story? It seems like it's more than nothing, which is extraordinary for the United States Supreme Court.
Well, I think the reaction has been quite significant. And I think because on a common sense perspective, when somebody is flying you around the world and taking you around on their super fancy boats, you are indebted to them. That just makes sense in a way that unless you yourself have private jets and your own fancy boat, it is hard to reciprocate. And I think that really troubles people who, are looking at the court as judges should be above reproach. That doesn't appear to be the case here.
So, Eric, I had a question. I, like Nicolle, also just found the reporting amazing and really dispassionate in the way it was presented. And I was wondering, it's so hard to look at the facts you lay out and square that with it all being personal hospitality. And in the statement that was issued by Clarence Thomas, he says that he did think it was personal hospitality and he relied on some unnamed judges and perhaps others in making that. And I was wondering what you thought was going to happen now. Is there any chance of having a hearing, having some answers to all of these questions, and whether Congress or anyone else is going to do anything? Because this really undermines the court for everyone, for whether you're liberal or conservative. It casts a shadow on everyone's integrity there.
Yeah, so we are journalists who try to sort of focus on the questions of what's happened and not what will happen. But what I can say is that obviously, senators and others have been troubled. And as to your questions, I will simply point out that we have asked Justice Thomas exactly those questions. Who did you get the guidance from? When? Perchance, was it written down, and would you share it if that was so? Because again, and I just want to be clear here, the law, more than a half dozen experts have told us, is quite clear here, and that Justice Thomas does not appear to have followed.
Harry, let me show one more sort of piece of this story. This is a photorealistic painting from one of Justice Thomas's visits to Camp Topridge. I guess if you're really, really, really rich, you name your houses. And this one is named Camp Topridge. It's Crow's private resort in the Adirondacks. Now, importantly, if you're in your car, let me tell you what I put up on the screen. Crow is on the far right, and Justice Thomas is second from right, smoking cigars at the resort. They are joined by lawyers Peter Rutledge, Leonard Leo, and Mark Pelada from left. The painting shows Justice Thomas enjoying a cigar alongside Crow and chatting with other conservative power brokers like Leonard Leo. Tell everyone who these people are and why this might matter.
By the way, a painting?
It's a photorealistic painting.
The main person there that is Leonard Leo, who was the head of the Federalist Society and the architect, by all accounts, of the new court, the person who really advised Donald Trump on the three appointees. Look, some of these trips cost $500,000. That's twice Clarence Thomas's salary. This is rank. And the core problem, and I do think you're going to be hearing, Sheldon Whitehouse will be all over this, and will it be enough to push them? It obviously pushed them a little. But the core problem is the last person who should be interpreting what personal hospitality means in this case is the recipient of largesse that obviously blows the concept of personal hospitality out of the water. So this is about the strongest argument for a code that actually applies to law, and law means somebody else who's nonpartisan decides it. It's a terrible black eye. I'm sure it is for Roberts. At the end of the day, it's going to be them who acquiesce to it. But if all, 7 of the justices say, guys, we got to do this, and if they do, this will have been a very big event.
I just, having been a Republican, I have to just say this. I mean, if Elena Kagan were flying around with George Soros on his private jet and island hopping on his super yacht, it would be like wall-to-wall coverage. I mean,
by the way, she sometimes takes trips. She
discloses them.
She discloses
We've covered them here.
Exactly.
I mean, and the notion that Clarence and Ginny Thomas have taken 2 gifts since that was 19 years ago. How did it get so fundamentally broken that one of not even the whole branch, but just the Supreme Court is acting as though it's above the law?
I actually think this kind of thing well predates where we are now. The court has otherwise become broken, and we've focused our attention on these sorts of things. But as you heard, after in 2004, the LA Times reports something about Justice Thomas, he stops talking. And in general, it is news that they've even given an inch here. I think that's been their policy, or some justices, including Justice Thomas, not Justice Kagan, for example, for many years.
Eric, where does this story go next? I mean, do you think there will be movement? Should we keep our eyes on the Hill, or just tell me, based on the reaction to the reporting, where you think we're heading?
Well, the Supreme Court, I think, for many years, because of the trust people had in it, was not really a focus of scrutiny and questions of accountability. People assume that the judges, they're in very nice robes, that they conduct themselves in a certain manner. And I think that you're seeing with our story and with some previous coverage as well, that is not always the case, and that scrutiny is now coming to bear on the court, as it should, simply as any institution that is as powerful as the Supreme Court, should face. So we will see. And I will say there is, I believe, more stories to come from us and others.
I think what I am going to take from that is that I should start anchoring in a robe. Right? Like the robe means it's all above board.
And going on vacation with Andrew Weissman to his condo.
Yeah, you cannot make it up. Eric Umansky, to you and your colleagues, congratulations on a really important piece of reporting. Thank you so much for joining us. Another break for us. We'll be right back. The happiest thing that happens for me is when this whole table is full, and it is right now. The Rev and Basler back with us to talk about the 37-day week that was. You first.
Right. As the Rev was talking about earlier, I mean, just so much between Donald Trump being arrested by a black man that he maligned for a very
1 week
long
ago,
time.
by the way.
1 week ago, which the Republican establishment in New York and now the country has been maligning, but it's that black guy that brought his butt back to New York from Florida. And everything that's happened since, particularly when we think about what's happening in Tennessee. And I just have to say this very quickly. If I center my students, the irony that they raise every day around what's happening in this country is phenomenal. I teach in the former home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Amid pictures of them all over the place, the fireplace where they did their first fireside chat and the library where the New Deal was created, is a sign on the wall that says active shooter protocols. And says it's broken down into three opportunities to act: either avoid, barricade, or actually, at the end of the day, in the worst case scenario, confront. That is the reality we live in, and that is what Justin Pearson and Justin Jones were fighting against yesterday. And I'd hope that it alarms and motivates all of us to move.
You don't need a fancy political operative to explain to any voter of any party, of any age, of any race, of any gender, that Republicans are for banning things that guns can't protect you from. Drag shows, books, and they're for more and more and more guns, even when that includes the ability to shoot up elementary schools.
It never looked more like 1965 since then to me. It was, the Faubus, Maddox era, dogs tearing at people's pants. I don't understand how the Tennessee legislature missed this, but as you say, it's just indelible and breathtaking. Not just the protests themselves, but the whole point. It's a supermajority. They have no need to do it other than a kind of politics of grievance and reprisal and nastiness. That, to me, a lot of inroads on Trump early in the week, but that was a really indelible image last night.
It also, I think, is an important benchmark in, Trump has infected the way the former Republican Party now, the Trump Party functions. They are anti-democratic as a reflex.
I wanted to take you inside the FBI, because if you're thinking that law enforcement doesn't understand the problem of guns, once a week at the FBI, somebody would give us the statistics of how many guns were sold. And those are just known sales. There's a whole series of guns or ghost guns that you didn't know. And everyone kept on being appalled week after week. They knew darn well what was happening with those guns. And you know what day was that was always, year after year, the highest day for gun sales? Valentine's Day.
Jesus.
And law enforcement gets it. This is not a sort of thing where it's like pro-law enforcement to be having sensible restrictions. Nobody needs to have an AK-47. And there are all sorts of restrictions that make a whole lot of sense. And the Republican Party is still captured by that group that thinks if you do anything, you're going to take all guns away.
Rev, you cannot adopt a dog from a shelter without a home visit and a background check, but you can go get a gun when you're 18. People understand this. Do you think it's a tipping point?
I think it can be if we follow it up. The question is what we do from here. And I look at this week, Tuesday was April 4th, the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And the irony of it is that on that day was the day Donald Trump was arrested and arraigned. And I thought about the Central Park Five, who was arraigned in that same criminal court building. And I thought about how I was one of those outside marching for them to watch Donald Trump go in that building on the 55th anniversary, being prosecuted by a black district attorney who Dr. King had a lot to do with a climate that would elect a black district attorney. But then I think in the same state that Martin Luther King was shot down in, these two young guys and a white woman would stand up against gun violence. Martin Luther King was killed in Tennessee. The bad news is that they're fighting them. The good news is that there's some young warriors that's continuing to dream.
It gave me some chills. Such a treat for me to have all of you here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. To Basil, Rev, Andrew, and Harry, a quick break from us. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for letting us into your homes for another week of shows during these truly extraordinary times. We're grateful.
Hey, everybody, it's Hoda Kotb.
And Jenna Bush Hager.
And we got big news, y'all. Our show is now a podcast.
That's right. You can take us anywhere you go, in your car, to the gym, even just at home on your own couch with a glass of wine.
We like spending time with each other, and now we love that we can spend even more time with you. Are you sick of us yet?
Don't be, because you can never have to miss a moment of fun, laughs, or friendship.
Yeah, subscribe. Listen to Today with Hoda and Jenna wherever you get your podcasts.